Wood Wars. How to play it. Let's set them up and knock them down. The first thing you do in Wood Wars is you build your armies. Both players decide on a point value that they're going to work up to, and then they take a class, a race, they take the two cards, put them together so that they line up and they get the movement, fighting strength, projectile ratio, and cost of them. Then they take the body for the class that they want and the head for the race, put them together. That is the marker pawn and the start of your herd. Then you fill out your herd with these generic pawns. But each one of these generic pawns are interchangeable with the marker pawn. They are all wolf soldiers as long as they stay together. So I could change this guy in the center with the marker. It's fine. They're all completely interchangeable. It doesn't matter where the marker is. They are all wolf soldiers. Now, if you are building a herd where in the alpha set I've got colors, but in the final version there will be icons on them, and they are both the same, this pawn costs twice as much because in this case the bear soldier is a very, very powerful combination. This means that you can't build bear soldier herds as big as you can other herds without using up all of your points. Now, being a big herd in Wood Wars is good. It allows you more contact when you're fighting. It allows you more strength in general, but it's also bad because it makes you a bigger target. So it's a little bit of give and take. More expensive means it's smaller, but it's very powerful, so maybe this smaller herd is good. You have to take these things into account. Now let's finish building the rest of the army. If you want to save yourself some time in setting up your armies and doing calculations, there are some scenarios set up in the rules for you to simplify that matter. Now, all the players are set up, all the pieces are taken out of the play area, they will be added back in later, and the next thing the players do is take these Gifts of the Forest tokens and they get to scatter them on the board. So now the tokens are scattered and we start placing terrain elements in the game. Imagine the board is cut into 4 quarters, and the first thing you do is randomly choose a player. One player puts a piece in one of those 4 quadrants. The next player gets their piece of terrain and they can place it anywhere on the board, but they cannot place it in that quadrant. Now that terrain is done, players alternate placing their herds on the game area. So, blue player here decides he's going to start with his elk soldiers, and he's going to put them kind of right here. The red player takes his archers and puts them here in the corner and decides to open them up. Because as archers, he wants to have as good a spread on his opponent as possible. Now, herds have to stay within 1 step of each other, and steps are measured with these little feet measurings. So they can spread out just a little bit, but they can't spread out too much, and they have to stay more than a step away from the other herd. So I'm going to measure this out because I actually want to put my wolf soldiers in between these guys. In this game, you are given little step markers, and these steps tell you how far a thing moves. So if a unit moves 8 steps, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now if that seems too cumbersome to you, there's a real easy conversion. These step markers are each 2 centimeters long. So just get yourself a ruler and convert steps into centimeters and do your measuring that way. So now that the board is all set up and ready to play, we switch to taking turns from play. A turn is divided into 4 parts: movement, artillery attack, hand-to-hand combat, and cleanup. It's important to remember you do not clean up your fallen pawns until the end. So the first player to move gets the movement token, and the player opposite them gets the artillery token. This means that they go first in the artillery phase. On their turn, each player decides which herd they are going to move. The bear soldiers have 8 steps, so let's see if he can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Without much trouble, that piece can get there. This pawn just got the Gift of the Forest token, so we draw a Gift of the Forest card, and that gives us a buff. Now I'm really sure that this guy is within 8 steps here, and I'm sure that this guy is within 8 steps here, so I move this entire herd here. So that herd has moved, and now the other player gets to move. Let's go through the movement phase real fast. So at this point, the bear soldiers here have been engaged in melee with the elk soldiers because they had a larger range of movement, and I've made this board very small for demonstration purposes, so we have melee right here in the first round of combat. But the boar soldiers hid out over here where they were safe from the archers here. Now at this point, the archers have not moved, and both sides decide that they are not going to move their archers because the archer's ability is that if they move, they do not get the ability to fire their projectiles, and both of them want to fire their projectiles. But also during movement, you'll notice this pawn right here separated himself from the rest of the wolf soldiers to grab a Gift of the Forest, and the rest of the wolf soldiers moved away. Now this pawn is more than a foot away from the rest of his unit, which means that he is now orphaned, or she. This pawn is now no longer, at the end of the movement phase, is no longer a part of any group. It was a wolf soldier when it picked up the Gift of the Forest token, and that would have been useful if it were a boar, but never mind. But now that movement is done, this herd remains where it is, but this guy becomes orphaned. And orphaned means that he can't move, he can't attack back, can't do anything until another herd, or the same herd, rejoins them. Now potentially this herd could have kept itself in such a way that that piece was in place, but if that had happened, I wouldn't have been able to talk to you about orphaning. So now that we've talked about movement, measurement, and orphaning, let's talk about projectiles, the next phase. And projectile phase is done by rolling marbles. Because the blue player has priority on the projectile phase, they get to go first. So elk soldiers have a projectile ratio of 1-to-1, which means every one of these soldiers gets 1 projectile shot. On the other hand, the bear soldiers over here have a projectile ratio of 3-to-1, which means every 3 of them gets a projectile plus 1. Aha, hit. Oh, I even orphaned a guy. That ends the projectile phase, and now we get to move into melee. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, we resolve units that are touching and ready to fight. In this case, the blue elks and the boar soldiers have engaged each other. You count how many of each unit is touching the other unit. It doesn't matter how many they are touching of the other unit, it just matters how many are you touching. Both players resolve the damage simultaneously. So 6 out of this guy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But 8 out of this guy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's it. Now the hand-to-hand combat has been resolved. It's time to go into cleanup phase, which means you take any fallen pawns, remove them from the board. Until this point, fallen pawns can act as a deterrent. And then you take any units that are smaller than their minimum size, which is the case of both this and this unit, and remove them from the board. Orphan pawns do not count because they're orphaned, so they can remain there and be picked up later. At this point, The tokens for who goes first pass to the left, which in a 2-player game means they just swap sides. And play continues back with the movement phase, keeping on going around until all units of one player has been eliminated. It's not looking very good for red at this point, but this was also a micro game to show you how all of the things work, and I didn't use very good strategy in it. And that is how you play Wood Wars.